The sound of her weeping carried across the parched earth like a mournful song, reaching Mitchell Quade's ears just as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of crimson and gold that reminded him of blood and dreams long abandoned. Mitchell pulled his horse to a stop near the old stone well at the edge of Cherry Creek, a small settlement that had sprung up along the Santa Fe Trail in 1878. The woman sat on the ground beside the well, her dark dress dusty from travel, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, had come loose from its pins and cascaded down her back in waves that caught the dying light. He dismounted slowly, not wanting to startle her, his boots hitting the hard ground with a soft thud that made her look up with red-rimmed eyes. She was beautiful even in her anguish, with features that spoke of strength beneath the current vulnerability. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was something in the set of her jaw that told Mitchell she was not accustomed to breaking down like this. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect his mother had taught him long before she passed. "Madam," he said softly, his voice rough from days on the trail, "are you hurt? Do you need help?" She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was friend or foe. In these parts, trust was earned slowly, and a woman alone had every reason to be cautious. Finally, she wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving smudges of dust across her pale skin. "I am not hurt," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Not in the way you mean." Mitchell stayed where he was, giving her space. "Is there someone I can fetch for you? Family nearby?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "There is no one, not anymore." He knelt down a few feet away from her, close enough to offer comfort but far enough to remain respectful. "I do not mean to pry, madam, but you are crying awful hard for someone who says they are fine." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice, or maybe she was simply too exhausted to keep her guard up any longer. Whatever the reason, she drew in a shaking breath and spoke words that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "My tears ran dry until today," she whispered. "I thought I had cried myself empty 2 years ago when my husband died of fever, when I buried our stillborn daughter, when my father lost his ranch to the bank. I thought there was nothing left inside me that could break. But today, I learned I was wrong." Mitchell felt his heart constrict in his chest. He had seen his share of hardship in his 32 years, had lost people he loved, but there was something about the raw pain in her voice that cut straight through his usual defenses. "What happened today, madam?" She picked at a thread on her dusty skirt, not meeting his eyes. "My brother was the only family I had left. He brought me here to Cherry Creek 6 months ago, said we would start fresh, build something new. He worked at the livery stable and I took in sewing and washing. It was not much, but it was honest work and we were making our way. This morning there was an accident. A horse spooked, kicked him in the head. He died an hour ago." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and finality. Mitchell closed his eyes briefly, saying a silent prayer for the dead man and for the woman left behind. When he opened them again, she was watching him with an expression that was equal parts desperation and resignation. "I am alone now," she continued, "truly alone. I have no money for a funeral, no family to wire, nowhere to go. And after 2 years of being strong, of holding myself together, I finally broke. I came out here to the well because I could not bear to cry in that tiny room above the dress shop where people would hear me and talk. I sat down here and let myself fall apart, and now I do not know how to put myself back together again." Mitchell studied her for a long moment, taking in the proud tilt of her chin even as tears continued to slide down her face, the way she held herself despite the trembling in her hands. This was a woman who had been tested by life and had kept standing, even when everything tried to knock her down. There was something about her that called to something deep inside him, some part of his soul that had been dormant for longer than he cared to admit. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then lifted her chin a fraction higher. "Wilhelmina Brooks. Most people call me Willa." "Well, Miss Willa Brooks, my name is Mitchell Quade, and I am going to help you." She shook her head, fresh tears threatening. "You do not understand. I have nothing to offer in return. I cannot pay you back. I am not asking you to." He stood and extended his hand to her. "But sitting here in the dirt is not going to solve anything, and the sun will be setting soon. Let me at least get you somewhere safe for the night, and then we can figure out the rest." Willa stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she placed her smaller hand in his calloused palm and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "When did you last eat?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the hollow look in her eyes. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the night before. I cannot remember." Mitchell led her toward his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Whiskey who stood patiently waiting. "There is a boarding house on the east side of town run by a woman named Mrs. Henderson. She is a good soul, a widow herself. I will get you a room there and a hot meal. Tomorrow, when you have rested, we will talk about what comes next." "Why are you doing this?" Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not know me. You have no obligation to a stranger." He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She felt small and fragile against him, though he suspected she was stronger than she looked. "My mother used to say that we are all just walking each other home. Someone helped me once when I had nothing and nowhere to go. Maybe it is my turn to pass that kindness forward." As they rode toward town, Willa allowed herself to lean back slightly against his solid chest, drawing comfort from the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blade. The tears had stopped for now, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted, but also oddly safe in the arms of this stranger who had appeared at her darkest moment. Cherry Creek was stirring to evening life as they arrived, lamps being lit in windows, the sound of a piano drifting from the saloon on Main Street. Mitchell guided Whiskey down a side street to a modest two-story house with a neat garden in front. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Willa down, his hands firm and steadying on her waist. Mrs. Henderson answered the door on the second knock, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour dusting the front of her apron. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she took in Willa's tear-stained face and Mitchell's serious expression. "Mitchell Quade, what have you brought me?" she asked, but her tone was warm, not accusatory. "This is Miss Willa Brooks, Mrs. Henderson. She has had a terrible loss today and needs a safe place to stay. I will cover the cost of her room and board." Mrs. Henderson's eyes softened with understanding. "You poor dear. Come inside, both of you. I just pulled a roast chicken from the oven and there is plenty to share." The interior of the boarding house was warm and welcoming, with lace curtains on the windows and the smell of home cooking filling the air. Mrs. Henderson led them to a small dining room where a table was already set for supper. She bustled off to fetch extra plates and glasses, leaving Mitchell and Willa alone for a moment. "You should sit," Mitchell said gently, pulling out a chair for her. "You look ready to fall over." Willa sank into the chair gratefully, her legs trembling from exhaustion and emotion. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for this kindness." "Then do not worry about it," he replied, taking the seat across from her. "Just focus on getting through tonight and then tomorrow and the day after that. That is all any of us can do." Mrs. Henderson returned with plates heaping with food and glasses of cool water from her own well. As Willa ate, she found herself stealing glances at the man who had rescued her from her despair. Mitchell Quade had a weathered face that spoke of long days under the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His hair was dark brown and slightly too long, curling at the collar of his shirt. His hands were large and capable, scarred from hard work, but they had been gentle when he helped her. After the meal, Mrs. Henderson showed Willa to a small but clean room on the second floor. "There is water in the pitcher for washing," she said kindly, "and clean linens on the bed. You rest now, dear. Things always look a bit better in the morning light." Willa wanted to believe her, but as she lay down on the soft bed after Mrs. Henderson left, she could not imagine how anything would ever look better again. She was 25 years old and completely alone in the world, with no prospects and no future she could see clearly. The tears came again, quieter now, soaking into the pillow as she finally allowed herself to fully grieve not just for her brother, but for everything she had lost over the past 2 years. Downstairs, Mitchell sat at Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee while the older woman watched him with knowing eyes. "You have a good heart, Mitchell Quade," she said finally, "but that girl is in a world of hurt. What are you planning to do for her beyond tonight?" "I do not know yet," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I cannot just leave her with nothing. You saw her eyes, Mrs. Henderson. She is drowning and she needs someone to throw her a rope. And you think you are that rope?" He met her gaze steadily. "I think I can help her find her footing again. Beyond that, I have not thought it through." Mrs. Henderson smiled softly. "You are a good man. Your mother would be proud of you." Mitchell left a generous amount of money with Mrs. Henderson to cover Willa's room and board for at least 2 weeks, then made his way to the small house he rented on the outskirts of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was his, paid for with honest work as a ranch hand for the Collins spread a few miles south of Cherry Creek. That night, sleep came slowly. He kept thinking about Willa's words at the well, about tears running dry and then flowing again. He wondered what it took to break someone so completely and what it would take to help them heal. The next morning, Mitchell was up before dawn, as was his habit. He tended to whiskey, then rode into town as the sun painted the eastern sky pink and orange. He stopped first at the undertaker's establishment, a grim building at the far end of Main Street. The undertaker, a Sommer man named Harold Price, was just opening his doors. "Mr. Price," Mitchell greeted him. "I understand a man named Brooks died yesterday in an accident at the livery." Price nodded gravely. "Terrible thing. Young fellow, too, could not have been more than 22 or 23. His sister came by yesterday evening, but she had no funds for a proper burial. I told her I would have to arrange for a pauper's grave unless she could come up with the money." Mitchell pulled out his wallet, counting out bills. "She will not need to worry about that. Give him a proper funeral and a decent marker. Whatever this does not cover, you can bill me for the difference." Price's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he took the money without question. "That is generous of you, Mr. Quade. I will make sure the young man gets a dignified service." "Will tomorrow afternoon suit? That will give me time to build a proper coffin and prepare the body." "That will be fine. Make sure someone lets Miss Brooks know the arrangements." From there, Mitchell went to the general store where he purchased several items he thought Willa might need. A warm shawl, some basic toiletries, and a few yards of black fabric for morning clothes. The storekeeper, a nosy woman named Mrs. Palmer, tried to engage him in conversation about his purchases, but he kept his answers brief, and his expression closed. When he arrived at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, he found Willa sitting in the front parlor, staring out the window with empty eyes. She had washed her face and tidied her hair, but she still wore the same dusty dress from yesterday. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her features. "Mr. Quade," she said, rising to her feet. "I did not expect to see you this morning." "I told you I would help you," he replied simply, handing her the parcels from the store. "These are for you, and I have arranged for your brother's funeral. It will be tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Willa's hands trembled as she took the packages, her eyes filling with tears again. "I cannot accept this. You have already done too much." "You can accept it, and you will," Mitchell said firmly but gently. "You need mourning clothes, and your brother deserves a proper burial. This is not charity, Miss Brooks. This is basic human decency." She sank back into her chair, clutching the packages to her chest. "I do not understand why you are being so kind to me. What do you want in return?" The question hung in the air, loaded with the suspicion of a woman who had learned that kindness often came with strings attached. Mitchell pulled over a chair and sat down facing her, his expression serious. "I want nothing from you except to see you get back on your feet," he said honestly. "I know it is hard to trust a stranger, especially in a place and time like this, but I swear to you, I have no ulterior motives. I am just trying to do what is right." Willa studied his face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception or hidden intent. All she saw was sincerity and a genuine desire to help. Slowly, some of the tension left her shoulders and she nodded. "I believe you," she whispered. "And I am grateful, more than I can say. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Quade. I am not looking for rescue. I am not some damsel who needs a man to solve all her problems. I just need a little time to catch my breath, and then I will figure out how to stand on my own again." A small smile tugged at the corner of Mitchell's mouth. "I would not expect anything less from a woman who held herself together through all you have been through. Take the time you need, Miss Brooks. When you are ready to make plans, I will help however I can. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway with a pot of tea and some fresh biscuits. "I thought you two might like some refreshment," she said, setting the tray on a small table between them. "And Mitchell, you are welcome to stay for breakfast if you like. I made extra flapjacks." The morning passed in quiet conversation. Mitchell told Willa about his work at the Collins Ranch, about how he had come to New Mexico 3 years ago from Texas, looking for a fresh start after his own losses. He did not go into detail about what those losses were, and she did not press him, sensing that everyone had their own painful stories they carried. Willa, in turn, talked about her life before everything fell apart. She had grown up in Kansas, where her father had run a successful cattle ranch. She had been educated at a small school for girls, had learned to read and write and do sums, had dreamed of becoming a teacher someday. Then her mother had died when Willa was 18, and her father had started drinking heavily. Within 2 years, he had lost the ranch through a combination of bad investments and unpaid debts. She had married at 20, a quiet man named Edward Brooks who worked as a store clerk. He was her brother's best friend, and while it was not a love match, it had been a comfortable partnership built on mutual respect and companionship. They had been happy enough, making plans for the future, dreaming of children and a home of their own. Then Edward had fallen ill with fever, dying within a week. Willa had been 3 months pregnant at the time. The stress and grief had caused her to go into early labor, and their daughter had been born too soon, too small, never drawing breath. In the span of a single terrible week, Willa had lost her husband and her child, and her father had drunk himself to death a month later, unable to cope with his own failures and losses. "My brother Thomas was all I had left," Willa said, her voice breaking. He was 5 years younger than me, barely 20 years old, but he was determined to take care of me. He said we would come west, start over, make new lives. And we tried. We really tried. But now he is gone too, and I am the only one left. Mitchell reached across the space between them and took her hand, squeezing it gently. You are not alone anymore, Willa. I know we just met, but I meant what I said. I will help you through this. The funeral the next day was a simple affair, attended by a handful of people who had known Thomas Brooks during his short time in Cherry Creek. The men from the livery stable came, looking uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes, guilt written across their faces even though the accident had not been their fault. Mrs. Henderson was there, and a few of the other women from town who had known Willa by sight. Mitchell stood beside Willa throughout the service, a solid presence at her side as the preacher said words about dust and ashes and eternal rest. When it came time to lower the coffin into the ground, Willa finally broke, her knees buckling as sobs racked her body. Mitchell caught her, holding her upright, letting her cry into his shoulder while the other mourners looked on with sympathetic eyes. After the service, several of the women approached Willa with offers of help and casseroles, the currency of comfort in small towns. She accepted their kindness with as much grace as she could muster, though Mitchell could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. When everyone had finally left, and it was just the two of them standing beside the fresh grave, Willa spoke in a voice barely louder than the wind. I am tired, Mitchell, so tired of losing people, of starting over, of being strong. I do not know how to keep going. Then let me be strong for you, he said simply. Just for a little while until you find your feet again. You do not have to do this alone. She looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with tears and something else, something that might have been the first fragile tendril of hope. Why are you doing this? Really? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. Because when I was at my lowest point, someone helped me without asking for anything in return. Because I see something in you, Willa, something worth saving. And because, he paused, choosing his words with care, I have been alone for a long time, and helping you makes me feel less alone too. It was the most honest thing he had said, and he saw understanding dawn in her eyes. They were both broken people, survivors of losses that had carved pieces out of their souls. Maybe that was why he felt such a strong pull toward her, this woman he had known for less than 2 days. Maybe they recognized in each other the scars that matched their own. Over the following weeks, Mitchell became a regular presence in Willa's life. He would stop by the boarding house each morning before heading to work at the ranch, bringing her fresh bread from the bakery or wildflowers he picked on his rides. He never stayed long, never pushed for more than she was willing to give, but his steady presence became something she looked forward to, a bright spot in her days of grief and adjustment. Mrs. Henderson watched the developing friendship with knowing eyes and a small smile. She had seen enough in her years to recognize when two people were circling each other, drawn together by forces they did not yet fully understand or acknowledge. Willa slowly began to rebuild her life. She took up her sewing work again, spreading word through town that she was available for alterations and dressmaking. The work was slow at first, but gradually more women began to seek her out, impressed by her fine stitching and fair prices. She moved from the boarding house to a tiny room above the general store, determined to make her own way and not rely on Mitchell's charity any longer than necessary. But Mitchell continued to be a part of her daily routine, and she found herself growing increasingly comfortable in his presence. He was easy to talk to, with a quiet sense of humor that sometimes caught her off guard and made her laugh despite her sadness. He was patient and kind, never demanding more from her than she was ready to give. One evening in late September, Nearly 2 months after they first met, Mitchell invited Willa to join him for a ride outside of town. She hesitated, uncertain about what such an invitation might mean, but something in his earnest expression made her agree. They rode out just before sunset, Willa sitting behind Mitchell on whiskey, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. He took them to a spot he had discovered months earlier, a small rise that overlooked the valley with Cherry Creek nestled in the distance. The view was breathtaking, the landscape painted in the golden light of the dying day. Mitchell helped Willa dismount, then spread a blanket on the ground for them to sit on. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun sank lower and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "I used to come here when I first moved to Cherry Creek," Mitchell said eventually, "when I needed to think, or when the memories got too heavy to carry. Something about this place makes everything feel smaller, more manageable." "What memories?" Willa asked softly, remembering that he had alluded to his own losses before but never elaborated. Mitchell was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and tinged with old pain. "I was married once back in Texas. Her name was Sarah. We had a little girl named Emma who was 3 years old. They died in a flash flood 5 years ago. I was away working a cattle drive, and by the time I got home, they were already buried. I never got to say goodbye." Willa reached out and took his hand, her heart aching for the pain she heard in his voice. "I am so sorry, Mitchell. For a long time I was angry," he continued. "Angry at God, at the world, at myself for not being there to protect them. I drank too much, got into fights, did everything I could to numb the pain. Then one day I ended up passed out in an alley in some dusty town, and this old Mexican woman found me. She could have stepped over me, left me to whatever fate had in store, but instead she helped me up, took me to her home, fed me and talked sense into me." "What did she say?" Willa asked. "She told me that grief is love with nowhere to go, and that I was dishonoring my wife and daughter's memory by destroying myself. She said that the best way to honor them was to live a good life, to help others the way they would have wanted me to. So I got sober, left Texas, and came here looking for a fresh start." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, understanding now why Mitchell had been so determined to help her. He had been where she was, drowning in grief and loss, and someone had thrown him a lifeline. Now he was doing the same for her. "Do you still think about them?" she asked. "Every day," Mitchell admitted, "but it does not hurt quite as much as it used to. Time does not heal all wounds, but it makes them more bearable. You learn to carry the grief alongside the good memories, to let both exist together." They sat in silence again, hands clasped together, both lost in thoughts of the people they had loved and lost. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars multiplied overhead, Willa felt something shift inside her. It was subtle, like a door opening just a crack, letting in a sliver of light. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could imagine a future that did not look completely bleak. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you have done for me, for sharing your story, for just being here." Mitchell turned to look at her, his face half in shadow from the rising moon. "I should be thanking you, Willa. You have given me something I did not realize I was missing. A purpose beyond just going through the motions of living. You have reminded me what it feels like to care about someone again." The air between them suddenly felt charged, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Willa's breath caught in her throat as Mitchell lifted his free hand to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "Is it wrong of me to be feeling this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "We have both lost so much. Maybe it is too soon, or maybe I am being selfish, but I need you to know that what I feel for you has grown into something more than just wanting to help a stranger. I care about you, Willa, deeply." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. She had thought herself incapable of feeling anything beyond grief and exhaustion, but as she looked into Mitchell's eyes, she realized she had been wrong. Somewhere along the way, without her fully realizing it was happening, she had started to care for him too. His steady presence had become the foundation she built her days around, and the thought of not having him in her life anymore made her chest tighten with something that felt like panic. "It does not feel wrong," she whispered. "It feels like the first right thing that has happened to me in years. But Mitchell, I am broken. I have so many pieces missing that I do not know if I can be whole enough for someone else." "I am broken too," he replied gently. "Maybe we do not need to be whole on our own. Maybe we can be whole together." When he kissed her, it was tender and careful, a question more than a demand. Willa felt something inside her chest crack open, releasing feelings she had kept locked away since Edward died. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, this realization that she could still feel something beyond grief, that her heart was not as dead as she had believed. They stayed on that hillside for hours, talking and sharing stories and stealing kisses under the stars. For the first time in 2 years, Willa felt like herself again, like the woman she had been before tragedy reshaped her. And for the first time in 5 years, Mitchell allowed himself to hope that maybe he could build a new life, a new family, a new love. The autumn deepened into winter, and Cherry Creek prepared for the cold months ahead. Mitchell and Willa's relationship blossomed slowly, built on a foundation of shared pain and understanding. They were careful with each other, both aware of how fragile healing could be, but with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger. Mitchell spoke to his boss at the Collins Ranch, a fair man named Robert Collins who had always treated him well. He explained that he was planning to marry, that he needed to build a future that could support a wife. Collins, impressed by Mitchell's work ethic and character, offered him a position as ranch foreman with a substantial increase in pay and the use of a small house on the property. On a crisp December morning, Mitchell went to the jewelry store in Cherry Creek and purchased a simple gold ring. That evening, he took Willa back to their hillside, the place where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. "Willa Brooks," he said, taking her hands in his, "I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I also know that what I feel for you is real and true. You have brought light back into my life when I thought I would always walk in shadow. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Willa felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but for the first time in so long, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Mitchell, I will marry you." They were wed in a small ceremony at the church in Cherry Creek on a cold January day in 1879. Mrs. Henderson stood as Willa's attendant, and Robert Collins stood up for Mitchell. It was nothing fancy, but it was perfect for what they both needed. A simple commitment, witnessed by friends, promising to build a life together. The house on the Collins Ranch was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a kitchen, a front porch that looked out over rolling hills, and enough land for a vegetable garden and a few chickens. Willa set about making it a home, sewing curtains for the windows and rugs for the floors, while Mitchell worked long days managing the ranch hands and the livestock. Life was not always easy. There were hard days when the memories of their lost loved ones came back sharp and painful. There were nights when Willa woke from nightmares, crying out for Thomas or Edward, and Mitchell held her until the terror passed. There were days when Mitchell grew quiet and distant, lost in thoughts of Sarah and Emma, and Willa gave him space to grieve while making sure he knew she was there when he was ready to come back to her. But there were good days too, increasingly more of them as time passed. There were mornings when they sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. There were evenings when Mitchell taught Willa to ride her own horse, a gentle mare he purchased for her birthday. There were lazy Sundays when they did nothing but lie in bed, talking and laughing and making love, celebrating the miracle of having found each other. In the spring of 1879, Willa realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of joy and terror. She wanted this child desperately, wanted to give Mitchell the family he had lost, wanted to prove to herself that she could carry a baby to term and be a mother. But she was also terrified that history would repeat itself, that she would lose this child too, and the grief would destroy her. Mitchell sensed her fear without her having to voice it. "I am scared too," he admitted, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "But we cannot let fear rob us of joy. Whatever happens, we will face it together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Willa was anxious throughout. Mitchell was endlessly patient, bringing her whatever she craved, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. The women in Cherry Creek, led by Mrs. Henderson, rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and reassurances that everything would be fine. In December of 1879, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Willa went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Mitchell, pacing outside the room where the midwife worked, thought he might lose his mind from fear and helplessness. But finally, as the sun rose on a new day, a baby's cry pierced the air. "You have a son," the midwife announced, opening the door with a tired but triumphant smile. "A healthy boy with strong lungs. Your wife wants to see you." Mitchell rushed into the room to find Willa propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. "Look at him, Mitchell," she whispered. "He is perfect." Mitchell knelt beside the bed, staring in wonder at the small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a tuft of dark hair and was already rooting around, searching for food. Something inside Mitchell's chest expanded, filling him with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "What should we name him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Mitchell looked at his wife, at this woman who had survived so much loss and still had the courage to hope, to love, to bring new life into the world. "What about Thomas Edward?" he suggested softly. "To honor both your brother and your first husband." Fresh tears spilled down Willa's cheeks. "That is perfect. Thomas Edward Quade, our son." Life with a newborn was exhausting and overwhelming, but also filled with moments of pure magic. Mitchell found himself utterly besotted with his son, marveling at tiny fingers and toes, the way the baby would grip his finger with surprising strength, the sweet weight of him sleeping on Mitchell's chest. Willa blossomed in motherhood, her confidence growing with each passing day that Thomas thrived. The seasons cycled through, and Thomas grew from a helpless infant into a curious toddler. In the summer of 1881, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, both physically and emotionally. She had proven to herself that she could carry a child to term, and her confidence made all the difference. Their daughter was born in March of 1882, arriving quickly and with far less drama than her brother. They named her Sarah Rose, after Mitchell's first wife, and for the flower that bloomed despite harsh conditions. When Mitchell held his daughter for the first time, he felt as if a circle had been completed. He would never forget his first family, but he had been given the gift of a second chance, and he was determined to honor it. The years passed in a blur of work and family life. Mitchell proved to be an excellent foreman, and when Robert Collins retired in 1885, he sold a portion of his land to Mitchell at a generous price, allowing the Quade family to have their own small ranch. It was not large by Texas standards, but it was theirs, built with honest work and careful planning. Willa established herself as the finest seamstress in Cherry Creek, her work sought after by women from all over the county. She sewed in the evenings after the children were in bed, building up savings for their future. She also started teaching Thomas and Sarah to read and write, determined that her children would have the education she had been fortunate enough to receive. In 1887, their third child was born, another boy they named Robert, after the man who had given Mitchell his start in New Mexico. And in 1890, they were blessed with twin girls, Catherine and Claire, who brought chaos and laughter in equal measure to the Quade household. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was good. Mitchell would sometimes stand on his porch in the evenings, watching Willa hang laundry or tend her garden while the children played, and feel overwhelming gratitude for the path that had led him to that well 5 years earlier. To a woman crying in the dust who had said her tears ran dry until that day. They had both been broken people, convinced that their best days were behind them. Instead, they had found each other and built something beautiful from the pieces of their shattered lives. They had created a family, a home, a future filled with love and hope. One evening in the fall of 1891, 13 years after they first met, Mitchell and Willa sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were finally in bed after a chaotic dinner and an even more chaotic bath time. The house was quiet for the first time all day, and they savored the peace. "Do you remember that first day at the well?" Willa asked, leaning her head on Mitchell's shoulder. "Every detail," Mitchell replied, wrapping his arm around her. "You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dust and tears." Willa laughed softly. "I must have looked awful." "I felt awful. I felt like my life was over." "And now," Mitchell prompted. "Now I feel like it has just begun," she said, lifting her head to look at him. "Everything that happened before, all the loss and pain, it brought me to you, to this life. I would not change any of it, because changing it might mean I never found you." Mitchell kissed her forehead tenderly. "I love you, Willa Quade, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for stopping at that well. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving." "You saved yourself," Mitchell corrected gently. "I just gave you a hand up. You did the hard work of healing, of choosing to hope again." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. From inside the house came the faint sound of one of the twins crying out in her sleep, then settling as her sister probably reached for her. Over the years that followed, the Quade family continued to grow and flourish. Thomas grew into a serious young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's intelligence. Sarah was spirited and independent, determined to become a teacher like her mother had once dreamed of being. Robert was quieter, preferring books to horses, but with a quick wit that kept everyone laughing. And the twins, Catherine and Claire, were inseparable forces of nature who approached life with fearless enthusiasm. Mitchell expanded the ranch gradually, building it into a modestly successful operation that employed several hands and ran enough cattle to provide a comfortable living for his family. He became known throughout the territory as a fair employer and an honest businessman, the kind of man whose word was his bond. Willa's sewing business continued to thrive. But as the children got older, she also began tutoring some of the children in Cherry Creek, whose families could not afford formal schooling. She found deep satisfaction in passing on her love of learning, in opening doors for children who might otherwise have no opportunities. They faced challenges, of course. There were years when drought hit hard and they had to sell off part of the herd to make ends meet. There was the year when Sarah fell from a horse and broke her arm, scaring them both half to death. There were the usual childhood illnesses and accidents that came with raising 5 energetic children. But through it all, Mitchell and Willa faced everything together, their bond strengthened by shared purpose and deep love. They created a home filled with laughter and warmth, where their children felt safe and cherished, where the painful pasts of their parents existed as history but not as shadow. Mrs. Henderson remained a close friend until her death in 1895. Having lived long enough to see the Quade children grow, and to know that the broken woman she had welcomed into her boarding house so many years earlier had found true happiness. At her funeral, Willa cried genuine tears of grief, but also tears of gratitude for the kindness the older woman had shown her when she needed it most. The town of Cherry Creek grew and changed over the years. The railroad came through in 1893, bringing new opportunities and new people. The wild days of the frontier gradually gave way to more settled times, though the spirit of those early years remained in the stories the old-timers told, and the values they passed down to their children. In 1898, when Thomas turned 19 and took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, Mitchell found himself with more time to simply enjoy life. He and Willa would take long rides together like they had when they were courting, exploring the landscape they had made their home. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, comfortable in the kind of companionship that came from 2 decades of marriage. One afternoon in the spring of that year, they rode out to the hillside where Mitchell had proposed all those years ago. They spread a blanket on the ground and lay back, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Willa asked. "If you had not stopped at that well that day, if you had just ridden past?" "Sometimes," Mitchell admitted. "But I cannot imagine it. You are so woven into every part of my life now that I cannot picture what it would look like without you." "I was so lost," Willa said softly, "so convinced that I had nothing left to live for. And then you appeared, like some kind of answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying." "We found each other at exactly the right time," Mitchell replied. "2 broken people who somehow made each other whole." Willa rolled onto her side to face him, propping her head on her hand. At 45, she was still beautiful to him, with lines around her eyes from laughter and a few strands of silver in her golden hair. He knew he must look older too, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines in his weathered face, but when she looked at him, he still felt like the man who had first seen her at that well, who had been moved by her tears and determination to help her. "You remember what I said to you that day?" she asked. "About my tears running dry. I will never forget it," Mitchell said. "I meant it," Willa continued. "I had been so numb for so long that I thought I would never feel anything deeply again, but then Thomas died and something broke open inside me. And then you came, and slowly, all the feelings I had locked away started to thaw. The pain, yes, but also joy and hope and love. You brought me back to life, Mitchell." He reached out to cup her cheek, his calloused thumb tracing the familiar lines of her face. "You did the same for me. I was just going through the motions before I met you, existing but not really living. You gave me a reason to feel again, to hope again, to build something meaningful." They made love there on that hillside, in the place where they had first admitted their feelings for each other, with the warmth of the spring sun on their skin and the sound of birds singing in the distance. Afterward, they lay tangled together, perfectly content in the silence. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in familiar shades of crimson and gold, they rode back to the ranch, to the home they had built, to the life they had created from the ashes of their losses. The house was full of noise and chaos when they arrived, with the twins arguing over something trivial and Robert trying to read despite the commotion. Sarah was helping with dinner, and Thomas was coming in from the barn, covered in dust and grinning at something one of the ranch hands had said. This was their legacy, Mitchell thought as he helped Willa down from her horse. Not just the land or the house or even the successful ranch, but this family they had built together, these children they had raised with love and laughter. They had taken their broken pieces and forged something beautiful and whole. That evening, after the children were finally settled, after the last dish was washed and the house was quiet, Mitchell and Willa stood on their porch one more time, arms wrapped around each other, looking out at the land that had become their home. "Thank you," Willa whispered. "For what?" Mitchell asked, genuinely puzzled. "For seeing me at my lowest and not walking away, for giving me time to heal, for loving me through the broken parts, for building this life with me." Mitchell tightened his arms around her. "I should be thanking you for the same things. We saved each other, Willa. That is the truth of it." As they stood there under the stars, they both thought back to that well in Cherry Creek, to a moment of desperation that had become a moment of grace. They thought about all the twists and turns that had led them to each other, all the pain that had prepared them to recognize and appreciate the gift they had found. The tears that Willa had cried that day had been the last tears of her old life, the final breaking of a dam that had held back too much grief for too long. But they had also been the first tears of her new life, the beginning of her journey back to herself, back to hope, back to love. And Mitchell, who had stopped simply because he heard someone in pain and could not bring himself to ride past, had found redemption and purpose, and a second chance at the happiness he thought he would never know again. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Thomas married a sweet girl named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch in 1902, and within a year, they gave Mitchell and Willa their first grandchild, a boy they named Mitchell Thomas. Holding his grandson for the first time, Mitchell felt the circle of life complete itself once more. Sarah fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher, taking a position at the school in Cherry Creek. She remained unmarried, content with her independence and her students, though there were whispers that the new doctor in town was sweet on her. Willa, remembering her own dreams of teaching, could not have been prouder. Robert surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to study law and moved to Santa Fe to attend school there. Mitchell and Willa had saved enough to help him with his education, and they sent him off with their blessings and hopes that he would make a difference in the world. The twins, Catherine and Claire, were still at home in 1904, 17 years old and full of opinions about everything. They were learning the business side of the ranch, showing an aptitude for numbers and organization that neither of their parents possessed. Mitchell often joked that when he retired, the twins would probably run the ranch better than he ever had. In the summer of 1905, Mitchell and Willa celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the county. As Mitchell watched Willa laugh and talk with their guests, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, he felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to his eyes. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Mitchell found Willa sitting on the porch swing looking up at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. Everything, she said with a soft smile. How 27 years ago I was sitting beside a well, crying because I thought my life was over. How I could never have imagined this future, this family, this happiness. It feels like a dream sometimes. It is real, Mitchell assured her, taking her hand in his. All of this is real. We built it together and it is ours. Do you ever think about them? Willa asked quietly. Your first family, I know you do, but does it hurt still? Mitchell considered the question carefully. I think about them, he admitted. Sarah and little Emma will always be part of me. But the pain has mellowed into something softer over the years. I can remember them with love instead of just grief now. I think they would be happy that I found you, that I built a new life and family. I do not think they would want me to have spent the rest of my life alone and mourning. I feel the same way about Edward, Willa said. He was a good man and I loved him in my own way. But what we have, Mitchell, this is deeper and richer than anything I ever imagined love could be. We grew together, healed together, built something real from nothing. They sat in comfortable silence, gently swinging back and forth, hands clasped together. Around them, the sounds of the ranch at night created a familiar symphony. Horses moving in their stalls, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees they had planted when they first moved here. I want you to know something, Mitchell said eventually. Meeting you at that well was the single best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me back my life, Willa. You gave me purpose and love and a family. Whatever time we have left together, whether it is 5 years or 30, I will spend every day grateful for you. Willa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from being loved so completely and loving just as deeply in return. And you gave me the same. You showed me that it was possible to survive grief, to love again, to build a life worth living even after losing everything. You were patient with me when I needed patience, strong when I needed strength, and loving always. As they sat together on that porch, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created, both Mitchell and Willa understood that they had been given something rare and precious. They had found each other at their darkest moments and had become each other's light. They had taken broken pieces and created something whole and beautiful. The years ahead would bring their own challenges and joys. There would be more grandchildren, eventually great-grandchildren. There would be losses too, as time took its inevitable toll, but they would face everything together, just as they always had. But in that moment, sitting on their porch under the stars, they were simply content. Two people who had been drowning in separate oceans of grief had found each other and swam to shore together. They had built a home, raised a family, created a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. And it had all started at a well in Cherry Creek, with a woman crying and a cowboy who could not ride past someone in pain. From that chance meeting, from that moment of compassion and connection, had bloomed a love story that would be told for generations, a testament to the power of kindness, the resilience of the human heart, and the possibility of second chances. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Mitchell and Willa finally went inside, arm in arm, to the warm house filled with memories and love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight, they were simply grateful for the journey that had brought them here, for every tear shed and every smile shared, for the beautiful life they had built together from the ruins of their past.